49ers trade for Trey Lance. My first reaction was bursting out laughing. What was your first reaction?
I was in love with the trade right away because for the Cowboys, it's like they didn't really give up much for somebody who is just 2 years removed from a first round pick. And for the 49ers, you're ending what was the worst draft trade in modern history.
Yeah.
So that was my big takeaway. And then for the Cowboys, this really got me talking about Dak Prescott. We've talked about on this show how bad that contract is. And now you have somebody who's going to play behind him, could potentially take his job at some point. I think some people on Twitter are going a little crazy saying he's going to take his job right away. But Trey Lance, it looks like he might be the succession at some point in Dallas, potentially.
Yeah, he could be the succession in Dallas at some point, but I really want to dig into the 49ers and everything they gave up first and then talk about their current QB situation. So 49ers give up, I believe, 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance, turning into a total of Bradley Chubb, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle. Mike McDaniel stepped into that role, and he was full-on Lightning McQueen, closed his eyes and said, "Speed, I want speed." And from that trade, he got Jalen Waddle, pretty fast receiver, and then he got Tyreek Hill, fastest receiver in NFL history, one of the most dynamic at his position in the league. Mm-hmm. And then, went out there, got Jalen Ramsey, Bradley Chubb, and they already have Xavier Howard on that team. So the Miami Dolphins hugely benefited from that trade. And then 49ers go up there, they're like, let's take Trey Lance, who is someone that we want to succeed Jimmy Garoppolo, who's already taken us to a Super Bowl, proven winner. Everyone, and not only that, everyone in the locker room loved him. And he's always been a great teammate and locker room guy. You take Trey Lance when after him, Justin Fields was taken. And you just gave up this guy for a 4th round pick when people were like, Justin Fields may be a sleeper for not only most improved player this year, potentially an MVP caliber candidate with all the receivers they added. DJ Moore, we re-signed Cole Kmet, and then we added some more running backs to go with Khalil Herbert. So that offense is looking more dynamic. When you could have plugged in Justin Fields, who would have been ready if he sat a full year behind Jimmy G, would have been great for him. And then he would have had Deebo Samuel, George Kittle on that team with him. Brandon Ayuk, and then you later traded for Christian McCaffrey. Maybe you don't trade for him. Who knows what happens if you draft Justin Fields, but he's still someone that went after Trey Lance and is going to be better than him in his career. One of the most dynamic runners in NFL history at this point already.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Already rushed for 1,000 yards. He's already accomplished more in his short sample size as really any of the quarterbacks in that draft outside of Trevor. But what came from this ultimately was Trey Lance, you get 4 games with him. He gets banged up his first year. And then this past year, what we saw from him just wasn't impressive. Didn't really seem like he was improving. Lost his confidence a little bit under the Kyle Shanahan offense. And for them, we'll go over how many picks they just missed out on, some of the talent that comes after Trey Lance. But also, even someone like Mac Jones would have worked better with him. Or Davis Mills, who was later in the draft for the Texans.
Damn.
So we're talking about, if we're talking about the biggest bust in this draft to this point, it's Trey Lance. Zach Wilson's not too far behind him. But ultimately, you're talking about a guy, Justin Fields, in an offense like Kyle Shanahan. I just want to know who was in the room at that time. Because I remember Kyle Shanahan wanting Mac Jones. He didn't want Justin Fields. He was a prospect. But talking about a team that runs a lot of RPOs, it's a run-heavy team. Why was it not Justin Fields at this point? He could have been an MVP already at this point.
Yeah, and that was a stupid media narrative as well, because it was like, oh, Justin Fields, can he actually throw? He's an Ohio quarterback coming out of the draft when clearly he was a freak talent as a runner. I get being hesitant taking an Ohio quarterback, but you should be more hesitant when you're gambling on a guy who really didn't play much in college, didn't play too much at the quarterback position in high school, and now you're expecting him to overtake Jimmy Garoppolo, where people were trying to say, oh, well, he has some elements to his game of Patrick Mahomes, but really Trey Lance was a much longer project that they anticipated. So on one hand, I give them credit for swinging, and you don't hit all the swings that you take there, but you also had Justin Fields in that draft, which is going to come back to haunt you. But even if you just kept Jimmy Garoppolo, you still ended up with Brock Purdy, who you would have gotten eventually. You still have Sam Darnold on this team. And then you would have been able to draft someone like Jamar Chase, J.C. Horn, who's an excellent corner. you would have been able to take in that draft. I believe Penei Sewell was also in that draft, some great depth. And it's like the 49ers already have a loaded roster, but if you replace Emmanuel Sanders with Jamar Chase, you're not telling me that you have the best receiver tight end core in the league, as well as a Kyle Shanahan rushing offense with Jimmy Garoppolo. I feel like should have just swung for the talent there. I get what you're trying to do with Trey Lance, but overall it's a failure. What was your kind of biggest failure and takeaway from the 49ers trading Trey Lance?
First of all, they didn't really need to trade that far back for Trey Lance because I don't think there was anybody who graded him as a top 3 pick. I think they could have probably kept him at 11 and been just fine. But then also, I mean, them getting a 4th round pick for somebody that they took 3rd overall, that's never good. I mean, obviously, his stock is probably the lowest it's ever been. He was going to be your QB3 behind Sam Darnold, who has been a draft whiff to this point, and Brock Purdy, who was the last pick in the draft. Like, to this point, the fact that you got a 4th rounder, slightly impressed, because usually someone like this, it's like a 5th or 6th rounder. He's a quarterback, so it is what it is. For the Cowboys, on the other hand, I think they got a great return for somebody who you mentioned here a little bit earlier that there was history with Trey Lance, and getting him for a 4th rounder with the talent that he still has the chance to take out there, I think the Cowboys absolutely won this trade.
Yeah, and the Cowboys definitely won this trade, and there is a little bit of history there. Have here from CBS says 49ers general manager John Lynch said that the Cowboys really wanted Trey Lance, the former 3 number overall pick who had recently been demoted to 3rd string and then also ultimately was acquired by Dallas for a 4th round pick. And then it says 2 years ago, the Cowboys had a 2nd round grade on Trey Lance prior to the start of the 2021 NFL draft, which is very telling for me because the 49ers went all in on someone that the Cowboys were basically like, this is a guy who could pan out. And we're going to take him in the 2nd round, potentially like not that Dak is Tom Brady, but potentially like a Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo situation. Let's let this guy sit behind our starter for a few years. And that's kind of what the perception around the league of Trey Lance was. So it tells you like at that time when the 49ers really wanted him, and it says John Lynch was really the guy who pushed for it, the general manager, Cowboys were like, yeah, this guy's a 2nd round grade. And that's a team that already has a quarterback, and we're looking to take a risk on a project, I guess.
Yeah, and it worked a lot better because for the 49ers, they needed to get someone, and, you know, in this draft, they had Trevor Lawrence. Obviously, he was taken before, but someone that can step in and be pro ready right away. You mentioned Trey Lance, the lack of experience he had in college, and even in high school, he didn't get a lot of reps. So talking about a guy who hadn't really played much, and you're expecting him to step into a role for a Super Bowl team that has their tight end, has their wide receivers, has their defense, has their coach, has their GM, has everything except for the quarterback. I feel like they would have been better suited if they went after someone like a Matt Stafford, someone like a Russ, someone like even a Derek Carr eventually that came into the pool this year. Like,